My boss found out I'm gay, and now he wants me. I always kept my private life separate from work, especially with a boss like mine, charming, powerful, always surrounded by people who hung on his every word. He wasn't just respected, he was untouchable, the kind of man who could make or break your future with a single glance. So I stayed quiet, professional, invisible. But everything changed the day he found out I was gay. I don't even know how he discovered it. Maybe someone told him. Maybe he overheard something. All I know is, from that moment on, the way he looked at me shifted. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't coldness. It was something else entirely. Something I wasn't ready for. And now, I don't know if I'm still working for him, or falling into something much deeper. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This story isn't just about desire. It's about power, truth, and the tension you never expect, until it's right in front of you. I was never the type to make waves at work. My job was simple. Project management assistant at a boutique creative agency downtown. Clean emails, schedule meetings, follow up with clients, and stay out of the way. I liked the rhythm of it, predictable, safe. And it was easy to stay in the background when your boss was Julian Cross. Julian was the kind of man who made silence feel electric. Late 30s, sharp suits, sharper eyes. He had this calm confidence that filled a room without trying. People either adored him or feared him. I just admired him, from a very, very safe distance. He never spoke much to me outside of instructions. A nod here, a note scribbled on a post-it. Occasionally, a low, "good work" muttered without eye contact. That was our dynamic, and I liked it that way, especially because, well, Julian didn't know I was gay. No one at work did. It's not that I was hiding. I just didn't advertise. I'd learned the hard way that assumptions kept people comfortable, and comfort meant stability. And I needed this job. I needed quiet. So when Julian called me into his office that Tuesday afternoon, I didn't think anything of it. I grabbed my notebook, straightened my shirt, and walked in with the same practiced calm I always wore around him. He didn't look up at first, just gestured for me to sit. I did. Then he closed his laptop slowly, leaned back in his chair and looked at me. Really looked. Not like a boss, like something else. "You went to the station this weekend?" he asked. My stomach tightened. The station was a gay bar across town. I hadn't told anyone I went, but I had been there. Saturday night, drinks with friends, dancing, a brief moment of feeling like I could breathe. I blinked. "Yes. How did you—" He shrugged. "A friend saw you. Mentioned it." I nodded slowly, forcing my heartbeat to stay normal. "Right." There was a pause. He didn't move, just kept watching me with unreadable eyes. "I didn't know," he said finally. His voice was lower than usual. "That you were gay." I swallowed. I didn't think it was relevant. "It's not." He leaned forward. "Not in the way you think." I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how he meant it. I couldn't read his tone, but the way he said it, quiet, slow, almost too measured, it made my pulse throb behind my ears. "I'm not hiding it," I said, my voice a little unsteady. "I just try to keep work and life separate." Julian nodded once. "Understandable." Another pause. Then he stood up. He walked around his desk, not quickly but with purpose. Stopped just a few feet away from where I was sitting. Too close for a regular conversation. Not quite close enough to break a rule. "I respect your boundaries," he said, voice softer now. "But I also think it's important you know." He hesitated. I sat frozen. He looked down for a moment, then back up, his gaze sharper now, more focused. "You're not invisible," he said. Then, without another word, he stepped back and returned to his desk. "You're dismissed," he added, opening his laptop. I stood, nodded, and walked out as calmly as I could manage. But inside, I was shaking. He knew. He saw me. And the way he looked at me right before he said those words, it wasn't just curiosity. It was interest. It was intent. I made it to my desk, sat down, and stared blankly at the screen. A Slack notification popped up. Then another. But I didn't answer any of them. Because Julian Cross had just cracked open something I thought I'd buried, and now I couldn't stop thinking about the way his voice dipped when he said, "You're not invisible," and wondering what exactly he saw when he looked at me. The rest of that day was a blur. I moved through emails and spreadsheets like a ghost, nodding through conversations I didn't really hear. My fingers hit the keyboard on instinct, but my mind was stuck in Julian's office, replaying the way he stood in front of me, the space he left between us, and the weight of his words. "You're not invisible." It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it, like he wanted me to understand something without spelling it out, like he was testing the air between us to see if I'd breathe it differently. And I was. I couldn't stop thinking about it. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, I'd rehearsed a dozen ways to walk out without passing his office, but none of them felt right. So I stuck to routine, grabbed my bag, headed for the elevator. Then I heard it. "Hey." I turned. Julian was standing at his door, one hand on the frame, his tie slightly loosened now. Less put together, less untouchable. "Got a minute?" I paused, nodded. "Sure." He stepped back, letting me in. The office was dimmer now, the blinds casting soft lines of gold across the floor from the setting sun. He gestured toward the chair, but this time I didn't sit. I stood there, heart picking up speed. "I've been thinking about earlier," he said, voice low. "I hope I didn't cross a line." "You didn't," I said quickly, too quickly. "It just caught me off guard." He nodded slowly. "I get that." Silence stretched between us. I glanced at the floor, unsure what else to say, but then he added, "There's more I didn't say." I looked up. He was watching me again, like he had something resting just behind his lips, something fragile, maybe reckless. "Julian." He stepped around the desk again, slower this time, deliberate. "I've had to hide parts of myself too," he said. "Even now. Especially now." It hit me like a quiet thunderclap. "You're not out?" I asked softly. He shook his head once. "Not here. Not publicly." And suddenly the way he carried himself made sense. The restraint, the control, the way he watched, measured, never gave too much away. "I don't think I even knew I was watching you," he said, almost to himself, "until I realized how easy it was to keep looking." My breath caught. We stood in that golden light, both of us on opposite ends of something we hadn't named yet but felt closing in. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He walked closer, just one step. Not enough to touch, but enough to feel. "Because I've spent years building walls," he said, "and for the first time, I think I want someone to see over them." I should have said something clever, something careful. Instead, I whispered, "And you think that someone is me?" "I know it is." My heart slammed against my ribs. This couldn't be happening, but it was. His eyes dropped to my lips for half a second, just long enough to send a spark through my skin. Then he looked back into my eyes, waiting. I didn't move. I didn't have to. Because in that exact moment, someone knocked. A sharp, unexpected knock at the glass. We both jumped. Julian turned toward the door. It was Amanda, his executive assistant. She peered in with her usual tight-lipped smile. "Sorry, sir. The Bennett call's waiting." Julian nodded, clearing his throat. "I'll be right there." She disappeared, and just like that, the spell broke. He turned back to me, face composed again. "Another time," he said quietly. I nodded and left. My hands were shaking as I walked to the elevator. The world outside had kept turning, but inside me, something had tilted on its axis. Julian Cross wasn't just my boss anymore. He was something else, and I didn't know whether to run from it or fall. I didn't sleep that night. My room was quiet, too quiet, and my thoughts were too loud. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Julian's face in that dim sunset light, standing just inches from me, speaking softly like we were the only two people in the world. And maybe, in that moment, we were. The next day at work, I kept my head down. I avoided his office, avoided eye contact, avoided the lingering thought that he might walk past my desk and whisper something again. I told myself it was for the best, that whatever had almost happened the night before couldn't happen again, that it was just a slip, a charged moment, a brief unraveling of boundaries. But deep down, I knew better. Mid-afternoon, I was alone in the break room, refilling my coffee. I heard the door swing open behind me and instinctively knew it was him. I didn't even have to turn around. "I didn't mean to make things weird," Julian said. I stayed still. My hand gripped the coffee pot a little too tightly. "You didn't," I said, though my voice was stiff. "I did," he replied. "And I need you to know. It wasn't just impulse. It was honesty. But I respect that this might not be something you want." I finally turned around. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept either, but his eyes still held that calm intensity, like he was waiting for a signal from me. "I don't know what I want," I admitted. "That's the problem." His gaze softened. "You don't have to know right now," he said, "but I don't want to pretend anymore. I'm tired of pretending." The break room door opened again. We both stepped back. It was Jordan from Design, oblivious as ever, humming some indie song under his breath. He greeted us both and started fiddling with the microwave. Julian gave me one last look, barely a second long, and walked out. The rest of the day passed in slow motion. By evening, I was the last one left in the office. I liked staying late. It gave me space to think, to breathe. I was packing up my laptop when I heard the soft knock at my cubicle. Julian. Again. "I didn't think you'd still be here," he said. "I was finishing up reports." He hesitated. "Can I ask you something not as your boss?" I didn't answer, but I didn't stop him either. "Would you ever let yourself want something you didn't plan for?" The question hit me harder than it should have. He stepped into my space, slow, deliberate, until he stood just on the edge of too close, and then, as if pulled by something outside of logic, his hand brushed mine. It was subtle, barely contact, but it was enough to send a rush through me, enough to make me forget every rule we were breaking just by standing this close. I looked up at him, and for the first time, I didn't look away. "I think about it," I said, my voice low. Julian's lips parted slightly. Not to speak, just to feel. We stood there in silence, his hand still lightly touching mine. But then my phone buzzed loudly on the desk between us, shattering the moment. I pulled back. He stepped away. "We should go," I said quickly. He nodded, but I could see it in his eyes. He didn't want to. Neither did I. I walked out first. He followed a few minutes later. When I got home, I stared at the ceiling for hours. What was I doing? This wasn't just a flirtation. It wasn't just an attraction. It was something deeper, and I didn't know how to stop it. The next morning started like nothing had happened. Emails, meetings, coffee, more meetings. The usual flow of office life that somehow kept moving even when my thoughts were completely somewhere else, or rather, on someone else. Julian. Every time I passed his office, I felt the air shift, like it was charged with something we were both pretending wasn't there. And maybe we could have kept pretending if the week hadn't thrown something at us we couldn't control. We had a client pitch coming up, a big one of those clients that could triple our yearly numbers and put us on the map. Julian pulled me into it last minute, said he needed someone detail-oriented to work directly with him on the proposal, which meant we'd be spending 3 straight days together, alone, in his office, late nights, locked focus. The first night, I told myself it would be fine. We were professionals. We knew boundaries. I brought my laptop, my notes, and a wall I'd spent all day building around my chest. By 7:00 p.m., the office was empty except for us. The lights were low, and the mood had shifted from frantic to focused to something else. Julian sat across the table, sleeves rolled, one hand in his hair as he reviewed a set of mock-ups. I was trying to stay on task, but every time he leaned over to make a note beside me, I caught a whiff of his cologne, or the warmth of his arm brushing mine. It was torture, the soft kind, the kind you crave even as it burns. At one point, he asked me to go over a section of the deck with him. We sat shoulder to shoulder, his laptop between us. The words blurred on the screen. My focus narrowed to the way his knee brushed mine and didn't move, the way his voice lowered when he leaned in. I could feel it. The pull. I knew he felt it too, but neither of us moved, until I dropped my pen. I bent to grab it, and he did too, at the same time. Our hands touched under the table, just for a second. That was all it took. When we both sat up, something had shifted. Our eyes met, and there was no looking away this time. "I'm sorry," I said, even though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. Julian exhaled, slow and quiet. "I'm not." My chest tightened. "This isn't smart," I added, but my voice betrayed me. "I know." Then, softer. "But does that change how it feels?" I didn't have an answer. My mind was spinning, and that's when the door opened. Amanda. Again. She paused at the threshold, eyes flicking between us. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face said everything. Julian stood quickly. "Need something?" I left my planner," she said, walking in slowly, eyes still scanning the room. "Didn't expect anyone to still be here." She grabbed the planner and gave me one last look before slipping out. The silence she left behind was brutal. Julian turned to me. "We can't do this here." I nodded. "But I don't want to stop talking to you," he added. "And I don't want this to go back to pretending." I looked at him, the truth balancing on the edge of my tongue. "I don't either." There, I said it. Julian crossed his arms, leaned back against the desk, and studied me like he was memorizing my face. "I live 5 blocks from here," he said. "If we walk, no one would notice." My heart raced. I knew what he was asking. Not a promise, not a decision. Just time. Time to talk. Time to stop pretending. Time to finally face what was happening between us. I packed my things slowly, then stood. "Lead the way," I said. We left through the back stairwell, and as we stepped into the night, walking side by side under the city lights, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit until then. I didn't want this to stop, Not anymore. His apartment was quiet, warm, everything in neutral tones like him, refined, composed. We didn't say much when we walked in. He offered me water. I said yes, even though I wasn't thirsty. My heart was pounding the whole time. We sat on the couch, but not close. There was still that space between us, the space where all the unspoken things lived. He looked at me and said, "I haven't let anyone in here for a long time." I nodded, because I understood. Then I said, "I haven't let myself feel anything like this. Maybe ever." Julian leaned back, exhaled through his nose, then looked directly at me. "I don't want to rush you," he said, "but I'm not pretending anymore. If you don't want this, tell me, and I'll step back." I looked down at my hands, and then I said, "I think I've wanted it for longer than I admitted to myself." When I looked back at him, he was already closer, not touching, but close. "I'm here," he whispered, and I didn't stop him when he leaned in. Our lips barely brushed, not a kiss, just contact, a question, and I answered it with one of my own. I kissed him, soft, real, and everything changed. Chapter 6. We didn't label anything that night. We didn't rush into declarations. But we sat on the floor of his living room until almost 2 a.m., legs tangled, hands resting quietly between us, talking, laughing, letting silence do what it does best, hold space for truth. He told me about the first time he noticed me. I told him about how I tried not to look back. He said, "I always wondered if you felt it too." I said, "I did. I just didn't know if I was allowed to." Julian smiled then, not the polite kind, but the kind that made his whole face soften. "You're allowed," he said. "You always were." The next morning, the world didn't end. We still had work, meetings, deadlines, but everything felt lighter. We walked into the office separately, kept our distance, professional. But when our eyes met across the hallway, there was something new in the air, and I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Because sometimes, the risk is the only way forward. And this, whatever this was, finally felt like mine. Have you ever ignored something real because you were afraid of what it might become? Maybe the thing we fear the most isn't rejection, but being seen fully and still wanted. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and share it with someone who might need a reminder. Some risks are worth everything, especially the ones that start with a glance and end with something real.